Question number 5 either deals with the empirical rule or Chebyshev. So the first thing I need to do is identify which column I'm in. Here, because it says it's relatively mound-shaped, I know that I'm using the empirical rule column. I now need to figure out how many standard deviations I went in each direction. So it tells me that we have a mean of 80 and a standard deviation of 13. We're looking for between 67 and 93. If we take those between numbers, 67 and 93, and subtract the mean of 80, first we get negative 13, then we get positive 13. This is the raw distance from the mean that we are. But what we really care about for this type of problem is how many standard deviations we are from the mean. It tells me a standard deviation is 13. So if I'm a raw distance of negative 13, and I divide that by a standard deviation of 13, that means I want negative 1 as the distance I went in standard deviations. If I do 13 out of 13, I get positive 1. So this tells me I went plus or minus 1 standard deviation under the empirical rule. Plus or minus 1 standard deviation under the empirical rule lines up to 68%. But know that the way that this question's asked in Cengage, both on the homework for this, on the sample final, and on the actual final, is it asks for it as a proportion. As a proportion, you want to record this as a decimal, not as a percent. So the correct answer to this question is going to be 0.68. You definitely want to have that table from early in class in front of you where you can line up and say, if I know it's empirical rule, my choices are 68%, 95%, 99.7%. If I know that it's Chebyshev, my choices are no info, 75% or 89%. So depending upon how the question's asked, you're going to need to figure out which column am I in, which row am I in, and then line that up to a decimal. Again, make sure you're putting it as a decimal, not as a percent. Question 6 gives me a sample space. There's 4 possible events, E1, E2, E3, E4. We know that in A is E3 and E4. We know that in B is E2 and E4. They asked me to list which events count in both A and B. Things that are in both A and B are only E4. That's the only overlap, so the set would just be E4. When it now says A or B or both, that's saying it can exist in either of them or both. So E3 and E4 both count from A. When I go to B, E2 is new, so I count that as well. E4 I already counted as part of A. So this includes E2, E3, and E4. For not B, we look at the sample space and compare it to B. B has E2 and E4, so E2 and E4 are already in B. That leaves in the sample space E1 and E3 that are not in B.